Good evening, everyone. My name is Jay Parsons, and in my day job, I'm an agricultural economist here at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, Nebraska. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's webinar, which we've titled Producer Groups. What are these about? How do they work? And why can they be so successful? This webinar is brought to you by the Let's Grow Committee, the American Sheep Industry Association. So we want to start by thanking them for their support and encourage you to visit their website to learn more about the American sheep industry and also to access a large volume of materials there, not just on the activities of the association, but also things that you can learn from, including links to recordings of our past webinars and a lot of other materials that have been developed as part of the Let's Grow initiative. The URL for the ASI website is www.sheepusa.org. And if you go there, the Let's Grow materials are under a rebuild link that is located under the programs menu item. You can also go directly to the Let's Grow website by going to the URL www.growourflock.org. And so we encourage you to go there to check out those materials and check out the association. Before we start, I want to remind everybody that we are recording this, so listeners can view it later, including yourself. All webinar registrants will get a follow-up email within the next 48 hours, and they'll have a direct link to the webinar recording. There'll also be a link to the webinar slides in a PDF format that you can view in case there's just one particular slide that you want to look at or share with someone. So all of these will be posted on the Let's Grow website, as I've already alluded to, in addition to the links that I'll email out to each of you. We're slated to go here. We got about an hour and 15 minutes to work with total. We've slated about 45 to 50 minutes worth of presentation time and then about 20-25 minutes worth of questions that we'll hold at the end. You don't have to wait until the end to submit your questions, though. If you have questions along the way, you can submit them using the question box, which is on your control panel down towards the bottom. You can submit your questions anytime, and I'll be moderating those when it comes time for the Q&A session. And I'll also be watching those throughout the webinar to see if there's anything we need to address right away. If you have a rather long question that you don't feel like typing in there, we do have the ability to unmute your microphone and allow you to talk directly to our speakers this evening, and you can ask your question directly of them. In order to do that, you should have a hand up in the upper left-hand part of your control panel that you'll be able to click and raise your hand, and I will see that, and then I'll call on you just like we would in a classroom and unmute your microphone and allow you to ask your question. So I'll go over that again when we get to the Q&A part, but again, encourage you to interact with our speakers this evening if you have some things you'd like to ask them and discuss. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers. We have two speakers tonight. To lead us off, Dr. Woody Lane will be speaking. Dr. Lane is a livestock nutritionist and a forage specialist in Roseburg, Oregon. He has his own company out there called Lane Livestock Services and a large amount of experience working with producer groups, as you can probably guess by the title of our talk. So he's going to be sharing his experiences with us over the next 30-35 minutes. And then we're going to bring on Dave Olila from South Dakota. He works with South Dakota State University as an extension sheep and field specialist. He's located in the western part of the state in Rapid City, South Dakota. And he's had quite a bit of experience there, especially in the last 3 or 4 years, working with a producer group there that's a little larger range flock situation. So Dave's going to share some of those experiences with us. And then we'll open it up to questions from the audience, and both Dave and Woody will be entertaining those. So with that, I am going to go ahead and turn the program over to Dr. Woody Lane. And Dr. Lane, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Jay. It's a pleasure to be here and working with you and Dave again. And hopefully this equipment will actually work. I'm going to be talking about producer groups, something that's I've been involved with for the last close to 20 years now, and things that have been very important, and they really do work. So I want to just share some of the things we've learned and explain the story of what happens and how they function. At least the model that I work with here in Western Oregon. Start out by very quickly agricultural education in the United States is designed to help farmers and ranchers. But farms and ranches are very complex systems, and they're both technical systems, which everyone knows about, but they're also businesses. And the thing is people who go to the universities or two-year schools, ag and tech schools or community colleges, they learn a lot of technical material, fair enough. But most of them are under the age of 25. And those are people who have the time to be at long colleges and go to semesters of classes, but they may not have families, they have not been managers, and may mostly have never filled out a Schedule F. So later on, as they get older and completely take over farms and become the managers of those farms, where do they get their information? Where do they work with others? Where do they have in service? Well, they certainly can't take weeks and months away from their farm or ranch to go to a university. They don't have the time for that. So what they do is they go to things of workshops from the Extension Service, various meetings, a webinar like this, the neighbors, and of course the internet, which everything is true on the internet. But that's where information comes in bits and pieces. Well, when I got to Oregon, over 25 years ago, I started to teach some courses on various things, and one of which was forage and grazing management. And I chose to teach that. Those were like private courses, 7-10 weeks long. They met once a week. They were in a private location, and people paid for them, and there was a sponsorship, in order to make the money happen. I'm not going to go into the details about this at all. The fact is, they were courses. People took those courses, and they lasted 7 to 10 weeks. They're different courses. In the end, though, something came from those courses. People who went through those courses and evening courses then wanted to do something more. Here's some examples of, not very fancy, of different classes that I had taught. Well, in any case, those courses became something more, and they led to something. And the main thing they led to, aside from was the development of these producer study groups. And that has been a major part of my life, and a very rewarding part from an outreach point of view, and rewarding, I think, from the people who are in that as well. You'll see. So Oregon, we have these private self-financed producer study groups. These are not run by the university or any of the government agencies, although they are involved in it as members. People working with each other, talking among themselves with a facilitated meeting. Some places around the country have these things called grazing networks, where people go on these pasture walks and kind of open meetings. These groups are not grazing networks. They are actually groups. They're study groups or forage study groups. There's lots of names for them. And they're very unique in the model in which, and Dave is working with another type over in South Dakota, but you'll see how these work here in Western Oregon. Over the years, we formed 3 of these groups. The first one was formed in 1995, the Umpqua Valley Forage Study Group. Umpqua is the name of the river of our county, Douglas County, Oregon. And it didn't have a very, very great acronym, but it was formed in 1995. And that's, you'll see in the map where that is. In 2000, a second group was formed. It's called the Forage and Nutrition Group. It's got a much better acronym. And people say, well, I'm going to go to a FANG meeting. You'd think they're going to a motorcycle club or something. But no, it's the FANG. It's over on the coast. You'll see in a moment. And the third group that I work with formed in 2002. That was the WV Gang, the Willamette Valley Grazing and Nutrition Group. And they've been meeting continuously since then. In fact, the first one, the Umpqua Valley Forage Study Group, in July held its 20th anniversary meeting. So, and the thing about it, you'll see on the right there, those numbers in blue, those are the numbers of meetings each of those groups have had since they began. And the sum total number of meetings that we've run is 531 as of this past Friday, which was the number 531. I would say between 2/3 and 3/4 of those meetings have had pasture walks, and all of them are between 3 and 5 hours in length. So we've done a lot of meetings. So here's Oregon. Those who are not familiar with it, to the west, of course, is the Pacific Ocean, and This is a PowerPoint presentation. This is a PowerPoint representation of the mountains. So that's the Cascade Mountains in green. And everything to the east of the Cascade Mountains is Eastern Oregon. It's dry, sagebrush type country, range country, much more similar to parts of South Dakota. West of this green list here, this green line, is Western Oregon. That's the land of lots of grass, lots of rain, big trees, that type of thing. That's kind of what most people think about in Oregon. So there's 3 groups formed. The first one, Umpqua Valley Forest Study Group, is in Douglas County around Roseburg, and up and down, there's at least one member from the county down south and down near Medford. And so there's that one. The second one on the coast is Coos and Curry counties, right along the ocean and inland a little bit. And the third one is up in the Willamette Valley, which is the center part of mostly the center part of the valley, and it encompasses 5 counties, and people come from a number of places. So here's a couple of just pictures of what Western Oregon looks like. We do grow grass, lots of it. There are places where there are lots of sheep. This particular place is lambing out right now. Some beautiful country. This is actually a actual ranch, not a resort. I was just on that place last week actually. And these sheep, and one of the great models in Western Oregon is these sheep actually, that's the ocean, and I think these sheep pay the rancher to graze in such a beautiful place. But in any case, these are some examples of what Western Oregon looks like. Here's something, so let's talk a little bit about the organization of these groups. The very specific way they're organized. Number one, they're closed. That means there's a membership list. It's not open to the public. It's not advertised. They're basically like a club, and members of that club can come to the meetings. The fees, and farmers and ranchers pay money for this. They pay about $150 to $200 a year, depending on the group. The groups contain 15 to 30 members, each group. Membership is not by person, it's by farm, meaning that the husband, the spouses can come, the people who work on that farm can come, and that's on purpose. So basically, membership gives the farm, the operation, a place at the table. We have monthly meetings, and that's pretty important. And then the meetings are rotated among the members, the different ranches, or other places. It can be in libraries, it could be in feed stores, it could be on campus sometimes. They rotate all over the place. And then every one of the groups has the facilitator, that's me, who is hired by the group to be the facilitator. So the model is like that. Well, you'll see a little bit more of it later. Membership is, again, from everyone on the farm. The types of operations that are here, I'm going to point this out, these are not sheep groups. They are not composed of only sheep people. In fact, they're composed of people who raise beef cattle, dairy, sheep, goats. There are companies that are in there. There's people from government agencies, NRCS, our Soil and Water Conservation District, which is like the RC&D, horses, hay, all are members. There are veterinarians in them. Also, the goals, the marketing goals range from straight commercial type markets to purebred markets, some are very large operations with thousands of animal units or hundreds of animal units. Some are quite smaller, but they're all paying the same fees. They all do pay fees. And the goals of these things, these operations are quite different or across the map. Some of them can be quite standard, in the regular markets. Some sell direct. Some have contracts with supermarkets to provide product every week. Some are grass-fed. Some sell themselves as grass-fed. There are organic farms. Some are not organic, and they're grass-fed, antibiotic-free, hormone-free. Some are not like that at all. Across the board, you might think that this is a problem. In fact, it's a strength. People from all these different places and models and type of operation bring a lot of information. So every single meeting, you'll have people like from dairy farms, a veterinarian, a small goat producer, and someone from NRCS, and a couple people from seed company discussing, for example, how to renovate a place, or how to deal with pugged up pastures. So there's a tremendous amount of experience that's brought to the table because they come from a lot of different places. When the groups first started, they set up a very interesting thing. The members themselves said they wanted a prerequisite, meaning that people need to know things before they can come in the group. Remember, the groups formed after people had gone through courses, so they knew things. And what they wanted to do in these groups is to build on that knowledge and therefore be able to discuss things with knowledge. So they required that new members, or nearly new members, have courses or have an equivalent background. In other words, they must know stuff. And these groups have to do with forage and grazing, but there are groups around the country that don't, because there might be a confinement dairy group or something like that. But the ones in Western Oregon, forage is the basis of our operations. Extension agents, they're invited, and they're invited to come in as a member. And in one case, they probably have one as that. Others have chosen not to. That's an ongoing thing. But many are invited. The main thing too is everybody's in the same room, and that's a very important thing. Here's an example of people. In this case, we've gone inside after a pasture walk, and they're discussing some stuff. That person right there is one of the best grazing dairy person in the United States. That's John Benson. Our typical meeting runs about 3 hours, and one group is 4 hours. The groups meet either in the late afternoon or the evening, beginning at 5 or 6 o'clock. We first take a pasture walk, except in the middle of the winter when it's too dark. But we take a pasture walk, and then we go inside and have some sort of a topic we discuss, some focused topic or two that we're going to talk about. Then there's often a speaker. There's a lot of interactive discussion, both out on pasture, but also in the conversations in the group. And of course, in the announcements, people are up to date on various things that are going on. Sometimes we have guests. That guests could be in person, or we've had many times telephone guests. People, and some of the people who are listening to this may have actually been the guests over the years. Speakerphones work very well, and then it's a working meeting. These are not potlucks. One of the groups tends to have likes to have a very light dinner served, but they're not potlucks. Potlucks take time. Potlucks will take half an hour, 45 minutes or more, and you only meet for a couple of hours. We fill those hours very, very well with things to do, things to talk about, very important, compelling things. We've never been sitting around a table looking at each other going, now what? So this time is very, very valuable and very intensively spent. Meeting, here's a just typical schedule, start at 6 o'clock, or in one case 5 o'clock, and it'll go for an hour, hour and a half, or even 2 hours of pasture walk. Then we go indoors, and the indoors can be in a house, a barn, and you'll see in a minute. In one case, just on last Friday, we had one that was in a grain bin. That was indoors. And then we talk about a focused topic. There may be guests. The host operation, but yeah, there's coffee or cookies or something, but there's usually not a supper or anything like that. We make some announcements, and at 9 o'clock we do end. So then people can drive home, because driving can be as much as an hour and a quarter from the place we meet. Here's an example of this. Actually was probably shot in February or 1st of March, a number of years ago. Here we have there's a speakerphone, an old time speakerphone. This was a few years ago, before there's Bluetooth, and a speakerphone here, and we're talking to a professor at a different college, at a different university, and you're describing how to deal with the roots of the plants and what to be looking for at roots. And here's an example of the group on the coast. Very periodically we meet in a local library, and you can see the board in the back there. That a lot of chemistry involved. In that particular night, we were talking about magnesium tetany, and there was various ways of showing the passive and active transfer across the gut wall and the effective potential of sodium on those transport mechanisms. So things can get pretty intense, and as you can see, people are laughing. Just some examples. These pictures I shot on Friday, just a couple of days ago. Our meeting was the Umpqua Valley group met here, and some beautiful pastures we were going over, some new stuff that was we were looking at, and the fertility. This was our our meeting hall for the night. It worked. They actually served a little bit of a dinner. There was here inside here on the right. You can see you gathered around. It was not necessarily. It got a little cold in there at night. But here's a typical whiteboard. They were set up, and they had some pizza and some salad. But this definitely was not a square meal. Here's some things that we end up doing. We share in addition to the information, there's also a lot of sharing. And we'll go around the room talking about the current feed status, the status of our forage and feed, or maybe looking how are you fixed for, let's say right now, if we were meeting and we went around the room, we would go from member to member going, how are you fixed for the summer? What are you planning to do for the fall in terms of forage, in terms of grazing? Because now is March, at the end of March, 1st April, at this point, we should be planning for fall planting. If we get to September 1st and start to decide, it's too late. The plan should have been made months earlier, and we will discuss that and reinforce that. And we'll talk about labor saving ideas. That's very common, sometimes on long-term goals, less so, but what are we thinking about doing short-term? And the big thing is, and this is in red, all the conversations, no matter what they are, focus on the profitability, the economics of the operation, and not just the economics of that pasture or that technique, but how does it fit into the entire enterprise? One of the things that we talked about on past Friday was how did these new fields fit into the entire enterprise of that farm, and were they being subsidized by the rest of the farm or not? And that's where so many different perspectives come into play. Here's some of the typical topics. These are just some sample focused topics over the years. We're like reducing winter feed costs. Everyone wants to do that. We'll do that. Different types of hay and baleage, different legumes, grasses, brassicas. These are all different types of forages. Some of these things, if you're looking at that, you probably not. Many people have never seen these things before. We typically will be discussing it. We're located in Western Oregon, in the center of some of the grass seed industry in the United States, and there are some of the national or North American headquarters are right in our area, and some of them are actually members of WV Gang. So there's lots of discussion about the different types of forages. We'll talk fertilizer costs and the efficient use and the true cost of making hay. Not what you're paying for it, but the loss of fertility and how to replace that fertility, and in addition to the labor. Things like high sugar ryegrasses and ultra high stocking densities. I just listed that. That's the mob grazing, where you have a stocking density of over 200,000 pounds an acre, and that stocking density is very different than stocking rate. If you don't know, that's exactly one of the things we discussed. Here's some techniques that members have used over the years. These are things that may have been the first in the nation to have used it because we were right on top of things in our discussions. MIG is not a Russian airplane. We're talking about management intensive grazing. K-line irrigation, stocking density. Again, I'm talking about that's different than stocking rate. It's grazing pressure. Something called T-Sum 200, which is unique to the West Coast. Things of soil moisture meters, soil tests. It's very typical. Very great detail about soil tests. We do that all the time, putting compost on pastures. On the right side, there's a whole bunch of different types of new forages. These are all things that have been tried and are brought into the management systems, in part not because they're just new, but because there's reinforcement and follow-up, because the groups allow that type of discussion. Because after someone plants something, 2 months later, we're discussing it, or we're out there looking, well, how did that TEF work out with that new forage brassicas? What's going on here? And people will be able to talk about it and see it's not just on the host farm, but when we're talking about it, everybody in the conversation is internalizing those questions and conversation to their own place. So therefore, everyone is learning from the conversation. It's simply not a matter of talking to someone and seeing what someone else is doing. Show and tell is fine, but it's really everybody's involved. I'm just going to let you know, give you a sample of the last 3 meetings, which occurred in the last 8 days, actually. FANG met on the coast. We were actually in the library that night. We had 2 guests, one from California and one from North Carolina. And one of the major discussions, one of the guests from California runs a large operation with accelerated lambing. So we're discussing the 3 and 2 and how that marketing was going to work. In fellow North Carolina was also doing some stuff relative to multiple farms working together, and the whole conversation ended up with some marketing and how to develop those markets and why the niche markets are working for them under some conditions. But most of the conversation had to do with soil testing. And there's an owner of an analytical laboratory was our guest. So we were going over soil tests in great detail and what those numbers mean and what they don't mean and some of the interactions and why we were seeing so much of the variability and the 2 types of pHs and all that type of stuff was done in great length. That took 3 hours. The one last Friday, which you saw the grain bin, was the Umpqua Valley Forage Study Group. It was a sheep and goat farm. We took a lovely pasture walk for about an hour and a half, and then we went in, and there were some new fields, so we were looking them over. And then when we got inside, our major conversation point was, okay, you have different fields. An operation may have different fields, but they're not contiguous. You got one a few miles away. You've got some other fields 3 miles away. You got some rental place, it's 10 miles away. How do those work together? How can you make them work? And maybe you should. And when should you say no? When does that not work? Again, we're talking profitability of the operation. And we also talked about, one of the members was an insurance agent. So we discussed in great length the insurance issues that people face on farms. And we're not talking about health issues here. These are insurance things about liabilities of livestock when they're on places, when they're on trucks. Found out there's insurance has to be when you're collecting data, when you're collecting credit cards, and the security of that data and how you can be liable, which really affects everybody who is doing direct marketing. And then also WV Gang, which is up in the valley, one of our members runs 90 bison. And so we were up there on a bison operation, and very interested in working over the various types of fields that are plugged up, because bison can do a lot of damage to a field during the winter. They seem to walk differently than and do different damage than cattle, nature of their hooves and their behavior. So we discussed the renovations and the species the forage species might be possible. ARG means annual ryegrass. And looking at winter feed alternatives. And then when we got indoors, we had a long discussion about cover crops and how it factors in the Midwest, and how those cover crops could be used or not used in our area in Western Oregon. So here's an example where this is about a year or so ago. Those are forage brassicas. Those are the improved hybrid varieties. That particular field, though, that had been planted 45 days earlier. And we just about put sheep. In fact, that was the first day they put sheep on that one. Now, all of these groups, the 3 groups that I work with, the main thing is, not only is it a closed group and an advanced group, people discussing and coming from different points of view, but the whole thing is there's a facilitator. That's me. And I am the meeting leader. I'm the discussion leader. I keep things on track. So we're not necessarily talking about the University of Oregon in the final 4, which they didn't get into. I keep the conversations on track because conversations will tend to go in various directions, and also keep them together. In a pasture walk, if anyone's ever taken a pasture walk, you'll recognize that people get spread out over a couple hundred yards, and it's my job to be the stock dog, to bring people together, and I've got that mandate, and it works just fine. I also do some background organization, setting up the meetings and where they're going to be, working with the guests, just some of the background administration. I monitor people who are coming, or when they're not. I have an attendance record, if you will, so I can see when people are starting to miss meetings, and I'll check up. And of course, I bring some technical expertise. That doesn't mean I give a lot of lectures. I don't, but I bring some expertise. I'm not just moving chairs. And when I've been in New Zealand and talking to some of my colleagues, counterparts there, because they're in New Zealand, there are these same type of groups in the same model with a facilitator and paid membership. My counterparts there are also bringing some expertise. They may be ag economists like Jay, or they're agronomists, or in some way they have some expertise. They have masters or doctors themselves. So that's my role. And I have to be, I am, as you can tell, enthusiastic and upbeat. We can do this. Always we can do it. Things are confidential, so what we say in these groups stays there. Every meeting, and this is one thing I always look at, every meeting must be valuable to every person who's come to that meeting, including people who haven't in the group, but certainly everyone who has, which means that I'll draw the conversations from people who are standing in the back. I won't let people dominate. People are people. And so I will maintain the conversation and build on things so that things work in a smooth way and everyone feels comfortable in coming to these things. And I work for the group. I get paid like a contractor. I am a contractor. And this is very important. I am not supported by any tax organization. I am not on the salary of any organization. I provide service, and it's my primary responsibility to the members of the group. That's a very important thing, because there's an old story, an old saying is, you danced with the one that brung you. Well, the ones that brung me are the people in the group. So I don't have to answer to anybody else if somebody else wants to make a decision that there's no funding this year, or their goals have changed in a large organization. I don't answer to any of that. I work with the group and the group's members. So here's a way it's set up. Basically, there's all the various ranchers or whoever's members, and we have veterinarians members. We have people who are members who are from NRCS and other organizations. Each one has a membership, and then they pay money to the treasurer. The treasurer is a member of the group who is good with organization, and they keep the records. Each group has its own bank account, and so they simply pay every 6 months the dues. And then the treasurer keeps track of that. And then I bill the group. I bill they send a bill to the treasurer, an invoice, and then I get paid, and I provide service. Essentially, that's what it is. There's no president, no vice president, no secretaries. There's no minutes. There's nothing like that. I do keep records, but they're not public records in any way. I just keep records because I keep records. I'm cursed by that trait, but this is the way it works, and it works very, very well. It's very straightforward, very simple, and we've been able to manage to do this without many hitches for 20 years. So here's an example. We're in a pasture. This is not actually a pasture. This is quite mature grass, and I think it's perennial ryegrass. This happens to be on a research plot of one of the seed companies. So this is stuff going to seed. This is, well, you're looking at, that's not a real pasture. That's a much overgrown pasture. And we're not very fancy. This was on a sheep operation, a large sheep operation in the Willamette Valley. And we were going over different, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different ways in which of handling summer grazing, because we don't have much grazing in the summer because we don't have any rain. So unless you have irrigation. So there's a couple of different possibilities, but this is typical of the setup that we have at a meeting. What's the value to the members? Well, obviously information. People gain information. That's one of the main reasons. But there's also the interactions. And the thing is, it's not like a lecture. And in fact, when we get together in meetings, we never set the seats, the chairs up in a lecture format. It's always in a circle, because that's the way the conversation goes. And that can be a little bit unnerving to people who are thinking there's going to be a top-down approach, but it doesn't work that way. There's this back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and that is a strength. There's a great support about ideas and mistakes and whatever. One of the guys once said he couldn't live long enough to make all the mistakes that these people in this room have made, so we might as well learn from them. So true. And also, everything in what we talk about is confidential. What's said in the shed stays in the shed, which is a New Zealand phrase because they use wool sheds. But that's what it could be barn. What's said in these discussions stays there. And so we're talking about things that are not open to the public, including economics. And that helps us understand what's going on and make good recommendations and good discussion because of it. And there's trust involved. Sometimes the members will have cooperative ventures outside the group. We've done some on-farm research and things of that nature. We just finished one last spring with the University of Wisconsin-Madison on an alternative parasite control program on the coast. A couple of ranches, we used a completely randomized design with 100 lambs and 4 treatments, and we worked pretty intensively with the University of Wisconsin. We've done a couple of things with other companies as well. It's a venue for opportunities, these groups. Someone comes through, we can have a meeting with them, and we can all share some knowledge. Finally, this is a closed, advanced group. There's pride and professionalism in what we do. And what's the value to members? Have we made out reports? No, we have not. Basically, people make out a check every 6 months. And if it's not worth it to them, they won't do it. And I mean, I'm going to ask the 100 or so people who are online right now. If you had to make out a check for $100 every 6 months, how many times would you do that if it wasn't worth it for you? And all these groups are self-supporting and they're sustainable. And you can tell by the number of meetings and how long it's been going on that obviously it's been sustainable. How do we begin it? Let me say this. How do we begin the groups? Well, the final goal is finding a producer group. So in my case, we started out with some forage courses. That led to these study groups. But there's a bigger principle there There must be a common shared experience. In our case, it was the forage courses. But it could be tours, it could be projects, it could be committees. You get a group of people together. Let's say there's been a number of pasture walks over the years, and you have a core number over a year or two. The same core number of people keep on showing up. There's the beginning of a group. So those type of things, there are ways of doing this. But I'm sharing with you how it's worked for us. And of course, there are choices to be made. This is a real picture. I wonder if, and some people actually chose that they only wanted one. What can you say? So here, my final thing is this, in summary, some keys to success in making these groups, making the groups happen from the model that I'm working with. Number one, there has to be a facilitator. That facilitator, you have to identify that person and train that person. And this is true if you go to New Zealand, you go to Australia, you go to UK, go to South America, where there's the CRIAS, I think it's called CRIAS. The facilitator is the key item. It's got to be a good one. There has to be a group membership, and that group membership has to be closed as opposed to having this open meetings where anyone can come. And there's paid, so people actually get something for their money. And in America, we value money, and we put a value on various things. And this type of experience and all this information is very, very valuable. We have regular meetings, and that's important because people miss meetings because they're adults and life gets in the way and you can't get to every meeting. So if you have 12 meetings a year and you miss 6, you still get 6 meetings. At one point, we were doing meetings every other month for one group, and that did not work as well as it could have. We went back to having monthly meetings. That continuity is important. And then starting a group, as I said before, we need to have a common experience, I think. You can't just say, let's have a group the way the old movie said, let's put on a show, My Dad Has a Barn. You can't start that way. You start with a group of people who've been sharing something together. It could even be a weekend tour or whatever, but then from there they can build. And basically these forage groups, these producer study groups are people helping each other. And that's what the thing is about. And I, as the facilitator, help make that happen. And I'm going to stop here, turn it back over to Jay and Dave. And I think Jay is going to take over. There's going to be some questions after Dave gets done. And then we'll go from there. Jay, you're still online, I hope.
Yes, I am. Thank you, Woody. Very nice presentation. And we're going to go ahead and switch over to my screen here. And go ahead and bring in Dave. We'll move to the west, obviously, or east of you, west for me. Sorry, but we're moving out to South Dakota.
Go east to go west.
Yeah, I know. I keep thinking Western Oregon is Eastern Oregon because you actually have grass. It's the opposite for us back here. So anyway, we'll go to Dave Olila up in South Dakota, and Dave's in Rapid City, South Dakota area with the South Dakota State University Extension. So it'll give us a little bit different perspective, not only geographically, but also in terms of the structure of the group that he's working with and his role with the group and whatnot. So Dave, I hope you're on there. Are you there, Dave?
Yep. Can you hear me?
I sure can. I'll just turn it right over to you and give you a few moments to talk about your experiences up there in South Dakota.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jay, and good evening, everyone. Yeah, we're just getting ready for a blow to come through tonight and see what kind of weather we have come morning. But certainly appreciate the opportunity to talk about developing producer groups. And Woody really hit on the major points on how those should come together. And to give you a little background of how we got about conducting producer groups, or what we call learning communities in South Dakota, as you see in the slide, is Extension was looking for another way to become valued. And it's just like what he was saying, when folks are competing for or looking at different activities to be involved in, there's always a competition for that time. And so therefore what you do and offer has to have a lot of value, and that's exactly what Woody was saying. So as you propose those things, you have to think about the value that they have and the takeaway that folks will have with them. And so we ended up through SDSU focusing on learning communities and trying to find those folks that had those common interests, and then serving them. And we, in many cases, then act as the facilitator, just like Woody was saying. And with some of our activities, you know, as you can see on the slide, we had 3 different producer groups that I'm showing. And on the Sheep SD one, that was one, like Woody said, to be exclusive. We did have an application procedure and had X amount of people that we wanted to serve. I had quite a learning curve on that one, so certainly didn't do it all perfect, but I think a lot of the participants got a lot out of it and had a lot of takeaways. And certainly as we moved to another producer group of common interests, was this South Dakota post-weaning lamb performance program, which is virtually a discovery of what those lambs will do in the feedlot and what value that has, and then moved on to hanging those carcasses and collecting that data. And that way those folks can talk about that. And we're just setting up our meetings now, which will start next Thursday on the 7th, to look at some of those data results, and also to bring in a speaker. In this case would be Brad Anderson with Mountain States, who's the procurement director, to talk about how that works, and so folks can ask those questions and have that experience. And likewise, the other producer group there that's been pretty active out west here, and these folks are closer together, and Woody might speak to that a little bit too, is, you know, that traveling time, if you get too big of a geographic area, really starts to cause issues, and you start to get a little different interests and issues that you have just because of that climate differences. So the closer they are, sometimes the learning community or the producer group can be more active and more responsive, and that's certainly the way that Soil Health Council is, as they've embraced, you know, a number of farmers with like interests and concerns that wanted to push that soil health initiative further and really understand it, so we serve them that way. But, you know, again, what he was talking about, that facilitation is important. You need to have leadership in amongst your participants as well, in order for that to be successful too. And a lot of what I did is, again, being that facilitator, but I didn't come up with all the ideas of the wants and needs. The people that are participating need to direct what the learning is that they feel they need most. And then in my case, I would go out and find the expert. And I'm really blessed out here that we have industry folks and extension folks in our state and in neighboring states that just were very accommodating and providing those educational opportunities that I certainly alone would never have been able to do. So it's really been an enjoyable ride to work with these groups and these individuals, watch them grow, watch them start to network and share. Like Woody was saying, a lot of times when they get to talking amongst each other, they'll certainly learn more with those visits than they will the presenters sometimes. And so I guess I'll end with that, and if folks have any specific questions they would want to ask, we can certainly talk about those in the question and answer period.
Thank you, Dave. And we will go ahead and open it up to questions to both of you guys right now. We got a couple of questions that came in, and I'd like to start by just thanking both of our speakers for their presentations tonight and for sharing with us their experiences. I think that's important for people to see things that have worked well before. As usual, you guys did a really good job of that, and just let our audience know we'll go about 20 minutes here with Q&A. Feel free to type them into the question and answer box down in the lower part of your control panel, or if you'd like to speak to our presenters directly, feel free to raise your hand and I can call on you and unmute your microphone for you to actually do that. We do have a couple of other webinars coming up. I'll go ahead and make this announcement right now. We have a May 24th webinar coming up with Dr. Bron Lewis of the University of Nebraska. And then in July, we'll have Dr. Dan Morkel of Iowa State on, and I'll give you a little bit more information on those two webinars as we get to the end. But let me go ahead and start going through some of these questions that have come in. And one of them hits it right on the head, I think, with both cases, both Woody and Dave. You guys are both working quite a bit on a regional basis here, and talk to the importance of people sharing their local experiences. The question is, how would you envision a national organization with regional facilitators? Have any of you given that any thought in terms of the role of a national organization, perhaps like ASI or whoever it may be? What is the best role for them to play in something like this in terms of having regional facilitators out there doing a good job like you guys are? So Woody, you want to address that first?
Yeah, I could address it probably with an answer that might be a little different. The facilitator is the person who is actually acting in the meeting themselves. I could see national organizations helping to set up workshops to train facilitators so that there's a central point where facilitators can come together, say the ASI meeting, convention or something, where a workshop is held where people can be trained about become facilitators. I can also see where a national organization could help bring networking together so facilitators who are in different places in the country can communicate well with each other, so that some of the issues that come up, some of the principles that come up, some of the problems that come up can be examined and shared and discussed among people who have similar skills. I don't see, facilitation of a group is a localized thing, but to get different facilitators from around the country to network is a very important thing. That's what I would think.
Oh, very good. Dave, you like to add to that, or?
Well, yeah, certainly on that big a scope, there's going to be a lot of glitches in trying to develop producer groups. I think Woody's got the concept. The other opportunity that the national, say like ASI, could do is, like they've done with the industry roadmap, and have identified some specific goals that they want to move to and produce in improving product and marketing in LAM. And so that helps drive us as regional folks with ideas and topics to help serve that agenda. So I think there could be some opportunity that way, and certainly the training and networking and updates that would feed those regional facilitators to help the producers and participants in those geographic areas would really help. One of the failed to mention, but Woody had talked about it too. Boy, in those producer groups, it is so important to get some diversity of people in there with different ideas, different ways of doing things, and that's when that learning really begins. And on a national level, you would find out how those different areas, much of it is a function of climate as much as anything, and availability to land resources that impact how they raise or run their type of agriculture. But you can certainly learn a lot from that. And so, yeah, a little bit of brainstorming, I think a guy could make something like that functional.
Okay, very good. And somebody asked my question, so this is cool. This is a question that comes to my mind a lot with these producer groups, and it's directed to Woody, and it says, Woody, do you have a problem with people being neighbors? In South Dakota, it's more of a huge competition between neighbors, and they don't want to communicate and help each other.
That's a very good, sure, that's a very good question. That's true. Neighbors don't, unless they go through membership in the producer group is voluntary, and again comes from some sort of a common background. They've gone through courses. It's possible in a producer group, for example, to have a Hatfield-McCoy situation, which would be the extreme of what you just described. that still can work because they sit on opposite sides of the table. They don't address each other directly. The facilitator can still make it work. The people join a producer group because they think they can gain something from it. And if they don't like somebody else there because they're neighbors and they've had some issues, then they may still join and not interact with them within the group. And the facilitator would be aware of this. And, as part of the facilitation process, set things up and work with things so that both parties or all parties are still comfortable. I find that to be something I'm very much aware of in every meeting, to be aware of what's going on. The flip side is sometimes neighbors get together and or people who are up and down the road are in the same group, and they start to work together better because they hear about other things going on a regular basis, and they're meeting in a neutral ground. The groups are a neutral ground, and I can't emphasize, like being in a classroom, I can't emphasize that enough. It's a safe place. So there's not going to be an eruption of an old argument. That will not happen. That's what part of my role is to make sure that doesn't happen. And if it starts to go that way, we can change it with some humor and keep moving on. So to answer the question is a very good one, but to be a member of a group that's working, you see how it works.
Okay. Thank you. And we have a lot of questions coming in regarding the interface between Woody's experience there as, a fee-for-service type of setting versus Dave's experience with extension. So I'm going to kind of hit those in no particular order here, but try to organize it for you. One of the questions is, how do you guys reconcile to be able to collaborate and not necessarily overlap and fight for clientele with local county extension agents, is the question. So I guess we'll start with you, Woody, since you're on the other side of that coin in terms of collaborating with local extension.
That depends on the person involved. And some agents we work together because we work together. Of course, we're professional. Others put a wall around themselves and it's turf, and they think that maybe extension should be the only purveyor of information. Although that's not written in the laws, that's the way they interpret it. That's a person-to-person, that's an individual case-by-case basis. There shouldn't be any competition. Extension offers all their services free, or maybe they charge to everybody. These producer groups are, at least the one in the model I work with, are closed groups. People join them and they pay a significant amount of money. And there's no reason why an agent, for example, can't be a member of that group and learn, as a matter of in-service. If the other thing is that there are situations in which extension may be, let's say an extension agent wants to start a group like Dave does, and Dave has got the mandate. He can do that. But in a lot of places, say a local extension agent, suddenly they may have their local extension committee say, well, you can't work outside of the county because we're paying you 1/3 of your salary or something like that. So in which case that would really hamstring the agent's ability to work with that, or work with a select group of people who are different than the general public. So there are some limitations that a tax-supported agent person has to deal with, whereas someone who's private does not. And it's not in competition. It can be very well a very growing and very positive relationship. But it's up to the agent to say, I'm okay with this, I really like it, this is a positive thing, or I don't like them because they're competing against me even if they're charging and I'm free.
Okay, very good. And Dave, you want to add to that? I know you have quite a few relationships up there outside of extension, if you look at that from the other side of the coin in terms of things you bring to your producers up there.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't do what I've done without the resources in the industry and fellow extension agents and obviously other government agencies. So it is foolish to be in any type of competition. We should be complementing each other and supporting each other's ideas. And that's where I'm really tickled with like that soil health council that we have. it's exclusive in the fact that, like Woody said, the ones that are interested and find value are the ones that consistently show up, and then the rest of us are there to help support and facilitate, and that would be anywhere from NRCS folks and Forest Service folks and Fish and Wildlife folks, but also one of the big, in this case, a co-facilitation is the agronomist with the local co-op who helps bring those topics up, and we go back and forth. You know, obviously the co-op's in business to make money by selling things, and I don't see it as competition, certainly, that they bring things to the table that I don't have access to, nor have the time to look them up. And man, if we can make those types of relationships, then we're moving the right direction, because ultimately it comes down to making these producers profitable and sustainable in the long term. And if we're in these communities, we certainly need to continue to get along, because we're going to run into each other in other activities for sure. The SDARO group, which is the South Dakota Ag and Rural Leadership producer group, and a lot of states have these, are really good in that way. And in that case, I've been invited every year that they have their new class to talk about the sheep industry as a person from Extension, but they don't rely solely on Extension people for their information, nor should they. There's a wealth of topics out there, a wealth of experts that have long experience that are well more versed in some of those areas of topics, and certainly should be taken advantage of to use those folks.
Very good. And I'll let
Jay.
Oh, go
Jay,
ahead.
hold on. I want to add two things here that are maybe a little more nuanced. These groups that go on, there's a ripple effect. When these groups, members of these groups try different things, often the people in these groups are kind of leaders in the area because they're well known, they're aggressive, they have a lot of knowledge. But when they try something like a new variety, or they do something else, or everybody around them knows that, learns about that, which is what Extension has been. We've all been talking about that for years, to have, you get the progressive people doing something and then other people start to pick it up. And these groups act as a focus point for a lot of progressive things that see, and then we find out things that don't work, and that also is a good thing to know. The second thing is Extension, one of the mandates of Extension is to help develop leadership. And that's what these groups are doing. The people who are joining these groups are themselves in some ways progressive leaders in the community, and this helps reinforce that. So in some ways, it's actually an extension of Extension, and so it is still kind of a new concept, however.
Yeah, well, that's a great lead into our next question or series of questions, because somebody asked, as a facilitator, how do you identify key regional leaders? And then they also talked about how important are these key producers, that these local leaders who understand the importance of collaboration in terms of solving profitability issues, who plants the seeds, and how does that whole interface work in terms of trying to get those key people involved, and how important is it to get those key people involved?
You want me to answer that?
Yeah, you are already into that answer, I think, to some degree there. So you want to expand on that, given the question?
I'm going to be honest. I don't care. Well, and the reason is I don't care. I'm in private industry. And what I do is I try to offer the best product possible, the product being a group like this. And then those who want to join are the ones that we're looking for. And so the people who want to spend money, remember, they're spending money for this. This is not like trying to get someone into a room kicking and screaming. People really want to join this once they go through some, well, in our case, some background. Different groups would have different prerequisites, but they're self-selecting. I'm not looking for the leaders. The leaders come because this is the place they want to be. And I've never tried, again, I'm not part of an institution trying to develop this, and every other thing. I'm offering if you will, a service to those members or those people who are members of the group, so that they can join and then develop and gain from that, if you will, a product. Okay. And so in that sense, it's self-selecting, but I don't go out and knock on doors or go down driveways banging on doors trying to say, would you like to join? We offer, I offer a course, and a lot of people show up to the course, both beginners, newcomers, and very experienced veterans. And from those courses come people who want to go beyond that.
Okay.
But again, I don't try aggressively to go around trying to find folks. That's other people's jobs.
Dave, do you have some experience you want to add to that in terms of getting key people in, or how important it is or not important?
Yeah, well, yeah, and that just shows the difference between private industry and a public institution. Yeah, if I didn't go out and beat the bushes to find some of these folks, especially like with the beginning producers, some of them are below the radar because they're so busy trying to make a living that they don't actually are not aware of what's out there. And so a person needs to go, at least in my position and my thinking, I need to find those folks, sell to them what value there is that we're offering with these producer groups. And our producer groups aren't closed by any means. Folks come and go out of them, and it's a different type of challenge with those learning communities, because the idea is to keep that thing perpetual. And so if I leave, or if I'm not a part of it anymore as far as a facilitator, does someone pick that up and continue on? Because you'll have folks that get what they got out of it, don't think they need any more, and move on, and you have new folks entering that are on that lower end of the learning curve trying to pick it up. And so from our point of view, we're trying to create these perpetual learning communities, and they're horrible hard to keep that going, because you have to have the common interests, many times common or similar education levels, and trying to move the same way. And there's a group process and a group dynamic there that really can raise havoc with that if you don't have a good facilitator to kind of be that referee.
Okay. And, from a producer's perspective, if there are existing producer groups in an area, what do they do to go about finding them?
In
Woody's case, you're talking a closed group there. Is it just all word of mouth, or how would just some producer that's going about the business come across a producer group?
Well, firstly, we've gotten 2 requests to join the larger group, the WB gang, in the last 2 weeks, and we've had to refuse them. The group has already reached its maximum size that we can work on right now. When that happens, I ask the people to take a course, and probably by that time they get through the course, there'll be an opening or 2. Mm-hmm. I don't, again, it's like anything else. If we're really looking for people, then you advertise, but I've never advertised at all. It's all word of mouth. And also, when I give courses, in those courses, I will explain how the groups work. And then at the end of the course, a couple of those people in the course, or I'll go to the couple of people in the course, and we'll talk about the possibility. But again, it's a major difference between public and private. There's a very fundamental difference in how we try to address and get people involved.
Okay. And I think I know your answer, Dave, right? Call your local extension. And...
No, sure. No, you got to use all those avenues of promotion and advertising. And certainly the social medias have been a big plus for us, with the newer generations, and to reach those people and let them know. And it still comes, you can do whatever you want, but if what you're doing has value, folks are going to hear about it and come. If it doesn't, and it's wasting their time, they're going to hear about that too, and it's going to go defunct. So okay. You're always held accountable that way.
Okay. I have a quick question I need to go back and take care of. Somebody asked if either one of you have experience working with groups that are hair sheep producers versus wool sheep. It looked like all the pictures were wool sheep that we were looking at. Either one of you have experience with hair sheep producers?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Anything different there to share, or are they pretty much the same in terms of facilitating groups and whatnot?
I'll reiterate this. These are not sheep groups. The ones I work with are not sheep groups. Anyone who has an operation that they're willing to pay the membership and get some knowledge is welcome to join those groups. They can have hair sheep, wool sheep. They can have dairy. There's one fellow who's now going to go into dairy sheep. Their businesses are the groups I work with work on the fact that every one of the members are operational businesses. The fact that somebody wants to their species of choice or their breed of choice is whatever it is, it's great. It's part of their business. And then but they'll be talking to people who have beef cattle or bison. So the concept of it being hair sheep or wool sheep is less important. And then when we get to talk about parasite control, for example, the concept of hair sheep comes into play, and that'll be part of the discussion. But again, these are not sheep groups. They are producer groups with people who are raising all sorts of a variety of livestock.
Okay. Dave, you guys got any hair sheep producers up there?
Oh yeah, there's certainly some up there, and we're not going to differentiate from them. We're certainly trying to serve the public and the producers however they want to do it, and we have dairy sheep as well. It's just that, like in this part of South Dakota, there is a very high number of wool sheep, so those topics come up quite a bit as well. But yeah, certainly the type of animal isn't as important as how we can serve the producer, and like Woody said, it still has to come down to profitability. And the other thing I would add to, and I'm sure Woody has those discussions, is the quality of life. If the wool factor reduces the quality of life because you can't find shearers, and that's a stressful thing, and you have loss of ewes and lambs because of that, then yeah, what's wrong with hair sheep? It's all about what you want to do and how that can be profitable.
Okay.
So, Jay?
Yes.
We kind of glossed over this, but you had mentioned about the distance to travel.
Mm-hmm. In terms of a local group, yeah.
Yeah, how far to go? Basically, you can go you can go a distance. It's more comfortable to drive maybe an hour and a quarter, no more than an hour and 20 minutes one way to a meeting. Okay. And within the group's geography, as when we choose hosts, we kind of try to bounce it back and forth across so that no one side of the geography is consistently having to travel more than the other. But I wouldn't, but we cross county lines, and there's geography relative to mountains as well. But still, an hour and 20 minutes would be maybe even an hour and a half would be the longest we would hope anyone drive to get to us. There are exceptions. There are individuals who will drive that a lot, but that's about as far as we would want to go. The rest is geography and history.
Okay, and then some logistics, and Woody, you might just quickly recap for this question. It says, who leads the producer group? Is there a president or board? Who organizes the meetings, invites speakers, sets focus topics, etc.? And I know you covered that. You want to just quickly recap how you handle it there in terms of those logistics?
In the model that I work with, in the three groups that I work with, there is no president, there is no treasurer, there's no president, there's no secretary, there are no minutes, there's no board. There is one person who is the treasurer, and that's the person who keeps the bank account and collects the fees and to whom I bill. The person who sets up the meetings is me as the facilitator, and decides or explores the different places where we can meet. I've got a big whiteboard in my office, and I see the next 6 months for all three groups at a glance, and I can see where we're going. And we are opportunistic, just like a lot of bacteria, I guess. We take advantage of situations that arise and build topics and sometimes speakers, if we have speakers, and we often don't, most of the time do not, based on what is needed at the time or in the next couple of months. And I do that background work. That's what they're paying me for.
And just quickly, how long are your meetings, typically?
There are 3 hours for two of the groups and 4 hours for the third group.
Okay, good. Dave, with your Sheep SD group, now that it's evolved to where it is, how do you envision this group continuing? What's it going to look like as it continues on? As we all know that sometimes, and Woody alluded to it in his talk, is a struggle in terms of having continuing funding and that continuing contact.
Yeah, and that's the bugger of it. We're pretty well finished with that group, other than they morphed, many of them morphed into the post-weaning lamb program group, because that was a specific aspect of sheep production that many of them obviously want to be a part of. So I would say half of those folks are in that group, and you know, it's changed, and we opened it up again, but just like what he said, in this case, it's pretty exclusive for those that are participating, because it was a 3-year commitment that they have to be a part of. So you don't enter into it lightly. That way, these folks will go on and they'll share with the others that are new to the group, but it creates its own new dynamic. And so it works, but yeah, the Sheep SD is pretty well. Our goal was, as we finished those 3 years, that those folks would become active leaders within the state association, the South Dakota Sheep Growers Association, and most of them have, and that's met our goal, and so we've moved on to another learning community.
Okay, good.
Jay?
Yeah.
Jay, I just want to add, of the groups that I'm working with, they're like 14, 16, and 20 years old. There are, in each of the groups, a number of the original members are still members.
Okay. Well, I got a question that follows up on that, Woody, directed to you. 2 parts. One of them, when you first began these, trying to form these groups and your consulting programs there, did you have to offer a lot of free programs to attract them in it and then turn it into a fee-based program, which is what people might think you have to do, and I don't know if you did or not. But if you would like to address that, and then in your mind, what's the maximum size? What's the optimal size of these groups that you should be working with as you try to attract people in them and whatnot? So.
All right, 2 excellent logistical questions. To answer the first one, we've never done anything for free. Members come in, they come in. Well, we pay every 6 months, and so they come in. If a new member is coming in, they come to a couple of meetings for free, just so everyone sees what's going on. They see what's going on, whether it's going to fit them or not. And then when they become a member, then they start paying, and if they're in the middle of a 6-month period, they'll prorate it. So they get the first couple of meetings for free, and then they pay the rest of the 6 months, and after that they get their normal 6-month billing. So we've never started for free. From the word go, from the first time we met, in the first meeting, we had no idea what we were doing, and we met. And we said, well, we just want to build on what we know. We took a pasture walk and this was the first group 20 years ago. We took a pasture walk and had a supper and had a little exercise on fertilizer, and then said, well, how are we going to deal with this? And I said very clearly, I can't do it for free. And we sat down and talked out the best way of dealing with it, and we set up some fees. Now, we went through some iterations as we learned how to, discover the wheel and all that, but it's always been people pay, and that's never been an issue. And the second one was what? I forgot what that second one was. Second question?
Second part of the question was the optimal size.
Oh, the optimal size. We decided to set that. We initially made a mistake. We said we won't want any more than 15, thinking that we're going to be meeting in people's living rooms, and you can't get more than that becomes uncomfortable. You get too many. Well, actually, in reality, you only get about 50% or 60% of the people who actually come to meetings. So by having 15, after a while, you start only getting 8 or 9 people or 7 people in a meeting. You really need more than that. So our maximum size is about 28 or 29, maybe at the maximum 30 members. So at that time, we're getting 20 people at a meeting. I personally don't like to see much more than about 20 or 22 people at a meeting. We sometimes get a little more than that. But if you get more than that, people get lost in the corners, and they start breaking up into 2s and 3s and separate, because you can't keep everyone in the same conversation. Ideally, somewhere between 12 and 20 people at a meeting. In a meeting, that means that the membership has got to be bigger than that.
Okay. Good. Well, we're out of time here. So I want to thank both of you guys for your time tonight, for making nice presentations of your situations and answer all these questions. And thank all of our listeners for sending in some great questions. And hopefully you guys found this useful and informative to you. I mentioned that we do have a couple of other webinars scheduled. We're going to have a total of 4 more between now and the end of September if all goes according to plan. 2 of them are set, and one of them is set for May 24th. We'll have Dr. Ron Lewis, who's a colleague of mine here at the University of Nebraska. He's in the Department of Animal Science, although I don't hold that against him. And he's going to be talking about genetic value of sheep, so focusing a little bit on the NSIP, but most importantly on genetics and how to actually hopefully quantify and look at and evaluate some of those different genetic traits in terms of what they bring to the production setting. So that'll be on May 24th, which is a Tuesday in the latter part of May. And then July 19th, Dr. Dan Moracle of Iowa State University will be on, and he'll talk about nutrition and supplementation. And Dan was a big fan of the webinar that Dr. Bob Van Son of Penn State put on for us last September, and he contacted me immediately after that and said, boy, I'd sure like to build off of what Bob did in that presentation. So that's the plan for that webinar on July 19th, and so look for those advertisements coming out in the coming weeks, and that you can sign up for those when they're out there. With that, I'm going to go ahead and just give one last thank you to Dr. Woody Lane and then also to Dave Olila. Thank you both for great presentations, and thank the audience for being here. And once again, thanks to the American Sheep Industry Association and the Let's Grow Committee for providing funding for these webinars. And we'll look forward to speaking with you guys next time. And in the meantime, look for that email to come in with links to the recording of this webinar and also links to the PowerPoint slides. So with that, I'll go ahead and sign off and wish everybody a good evening.